Welcome to my World History Notes, where I read from the book I wrote to teach world history to homeschoolers. A Bible believer looks for world history. You can look at that book, see that book on lulu.com, amazon.com, or at the Bible Baptist bookstore, or just follow me here. Now, today we're going to talk about a Persian Empire, um, and from my book. So let's begin. Now we turn to Persia and to the Medes, who helped them come to power, just as they had helped destroy Assyria. No one is certain as to the origin of the Medes. The first mention of them is on a tablet recording an expedition of Salmaneser III into a country called Persua in the mountains of Kurdistan about 837 BC, according to Will Durant. There are supposedly, Will and Ariel Durant, there are supposedly 27 kings ruled over 27 thinly populated states called Amadei, Madai, and Medes. The sacred scriptures of the Persians, called Zend Avesta, idealized the memory of this homeland and described it as a paradise. It is possible that the people here migrated from Central Asia, where their ancestors had wandered after the flood. They found the mineral-rich land in Persia with copper, iron, lead, gold, and silver, marble, and precious stones. Their first king, Deioces, founded their first capital, Ecbatana. According to Herodotus, Deioces achieved power with a reputation for being just, but then became a vicious tyrant. Under his leadership, the Medes became a threat to Assyria, which repeatedly invaded them. Assyria, however, was unable to put down the constant struggle for freedom. It was the greatest of Median kings, Cyaxares, who destroyed Nineveh. The peace treaty they had with the Lydians after the eclipse foretold by Thales was sealed by the combatants drinking each other's blood. His brief empire included Assyria, Persia, and Media. Within a generation, it was gone. The Medes gave Persia the Aryan Indo-European language, as it is termed by historians and linguists alike. They also gave the Persians the Zoroastrian religion of a good god, Ahura Mazda, and a bad god, Ahriman, and the law that Daniel in the book of Esther referred to as being unalterable. Cyaxares' son, Astyages, immediately frittered away the kingdom in luxury and effeminate fashion. The once simple warlike people became slaves to wealth and comfort. Astyages was a brutal tyrant who once forced someone to eat the body of the unfortunate victim's own son. This person, Harpagus, got his revenge by helping Cyrus the Persian take power, and instantly the Medes, who were masters of the Persians, became their servants, and Persia began its destiny to conquer the entire Near Eastern world. Cyrus was a natural leader, the kind of which Ralph Waldo Emerson, the American philosopher, said, at whose coronation all men rejoice. To quote Durant, quote, royal in spirit and action, capable of wise administration as well as of dramatic conquest, generous to the defeated and loved by those who had been his enemies. No wonder the Greeks made him the subject of innumerable romances, and to their minds, the greatest hero before Alexander. He was handsome by all accounts and a natural leader. His ambition was his undoing, as his constant warfare resulted in his death in a campaign against an obscure tribe. Like Alexander, he created an empire, but did not live to enjoy it. His one weakness was typical Oriental cruelty, which his half-mad son, Cambyses, inherited. His attempt to conquer Egypt and add it to the empire succeeded, but resulted in his complete insanity. He lost 50,000 soldiers in the desert, and his campaign to conquer Carthage ended in failure. At its greatest size, under Darius, the Persian Empire included 20 provinces or satraps, embracing Egypt, Palestine, Syria, Phoenicia, Lydia, Phrygia, Ionia, Cappadocia, Cilicia, Armenia, Assyria, the Caucasus, Babylonia, Media, Persia, modern Afghanistan and Baluchistan, India west of the Indus River, and more. Never before had history recorded so extensive an area brought under one government. Persia ruled for 200 years from the country now known to us as Iran. Quoting again from Durant, quote, the real basis of the royal power and imperial government was the army. An empire exists only so long as it retains a superior capacity to kill. Japheth will be enlarged. See Genesis 9:27. The culture of Persia was closely akin to the Aryan culture of the invaders of India. Darius I, in an inscription at Naqsh-i-Rustam, described himself as, quote, a Persian, the son of a Persian, an Aryan of Aryan descent. The Zoroastrians spoke of their mountainous and hospitable land that produced such hardy race of warriors as Ariano Vajo, the Aryan home. Make note of this and remember when we talk much later about the rise in philosophy of Adolf Hitler in Germany. As in most Near Eastern cultures, and in fact, most cultures throughout history, the common man was illiterate and devoted his entire life to farming, however primitive. Barley and wheat were their staple crops, but meat was also a staple, as was the drinking of a great deal of wine. When the Persians did take to writing, they used the Babylonian cuneiform for their inscriptions and the Semitic alphabet for their documents. Cyrus served wine to his army and the Persian councils. Durant tells us that Cyrus, the Persian councils, never made a decision while sober. Persia had a very low level of industry and depended upon its conquered nations to produce luxuries. They, like their predecessors, did engage in great building projects, and the great highway from Sardis to Susa, built by Darius I, was 1,500 miles long. Also, like Assyria and Babylon before it, the life of Persia revolved around the military rather than the political. Its wealth was based not on industry, but on sheer power. Persian government was usually competent, though, and highly organized, as the Bible reveals, from the emperor, who was called King of Kings, followed by the Greeks Basileus, or simply the king, down to the lowest noble governmental ruler governing what was absolute power. The king had total control over life and death, and there are many stories regarding what would be regarded by us as pure cruelty, by what was regarded by them as absolute necessary for proper government. One story explains the cruelty as a father begged the emperor not to take his last and only surviving son for the army, only to watch the army march out between the two halves of that very son, cut in two by orders of the emperor, in punishment for such presumption on part of a commoner. Another story has a father only being able to compliment the emperor on his archery skills after that emperor executes his son with an arrow. This is the legacy and consequence of permitting rulers to have absolute power. With regard to religion, Persian divines reported that a great prophet appeared in the ancient home of the Aryans named Zarathustra. The Greeks called him Zoroastes. He was supposedly divinely born after his guardian angel entered a plant and passed the juice on to a priest, who offered a sacrifice, after which a ray of heaven's glory entered the bosom of a girl of noble lineage. Once again, Satan counterfeits Genesis 3:15 in many shapes and forms. The rest of Zarathustra's story is interesting, but very fanciful. From his having his entrails filled with molten lead and not minding it one bit, to his writing of the book of the knowledge at the hands of the good god Ahura Mazda. The Zoroastrian religion is now born. It is from this that the Roman Catholic Church got their, quote, angels with wings, of which there are none in the Bible, and Islam received their view of heaven as a garden opposed to the Bible's heavenly city, the New Jerusalem. Persian religion was mixed with Persian government, as in other cultures we have discussed, and the specter of the church-state alliance always ruled over the people. For example, minor moral offenses could be punished by flogging or death. However, their idea of morality was vastly different from ours. Pedophilia was learned from the Greeks, according to Herodotus, in spite of the fact that the Avesta lists such behavior as the unforgivable sin. The Persian world was eventually conquered by the Greek world militarily in the person of Alexander the Great, but we'll go into much more detail about that and the fourfold division of Alexander's empire, along with Greek culture, philosophy, and science when we come to Alexander's study, as he represents the height of the Greek world. It is during that discussion that we will also discuss the failed attempt by Persia to conquer Europe through Greece, and how the moral and physical backbone of Persia was broken at the battles of Marathon, Salamis, and Plataea. According to Usher's dating, Cyrus marched against Babylon in 539 BC and took it in 538 BC, which surprised the Babylonians, who believed they could withstand a 20-year siege or so, Herodotus tells us. The Median-Persian alliance permits Darius to take over the administration of Babylon. In 537 BC, Cyrus gave permission for all of the Jews to return to their country. Reading Daniel will give you a more personal look at the last part of the reign of the Babylonian kings and the first part of the reign of the Median Persian kings. The events of Esther take place later, beginning in 518 BC. Trouble with Greece began for the Persians about 501 BC. In 480 BC, the Persian king Xerxes marches on Greece with an army of more than 2 million men. Persia's attempt to subjugate Greece fails with devastating defeats at the battles of Marathon and Plataea. Xerxes' mission met its greatest failure at the naval battle of Salamis. As Alexander the Great will represent the height of Greek military success, so will Antiochus Epiphanes reflect the utter depravity of the Greek culture. But before we study Greece in detail, Let's first look at the beginnings of Rome, for there are many lessons to be learned from history's greatest man made empire. We'll stop there today and we'll pick it up next time. Thank you.